Hello everyone. For this assignment, I would like to share with you some of the things that stood out to me as I was reading through this week's assigned text, The Art of Public Speaking, chapters 3 and 4. In chapter 3, one thing that stood out to me was when the author is speaking of the characteristics of a good listener. One of those characteristics that he discusses is not jumping to conclusions. This really resonated with me because it's something that I tend to do, and perhaps it's something we all tend to do. That is, jump to conclusions based off a speaker's or someone that I'm communicating with initial words, or what they initially begin to communicate. I think that I know where they're going to go with it and what the conclusion is they're going to reach, and I automatically jump to that versus taking the time to allow the speaker to give a complete presentation and then base my evaluation off that complete presentation. And I think this is just good practice, whether it's as a listener to a public speaker or in any of our relationships that require communication, which is virtually any communication or any relationship, excuse me. So it's important to allow the speaker to fully present their ideas and then evaluate those ideas based off of their presentation of it, not a preconceived presentation. The second thing that stood out to me as I was reading through the assigned text this week was in chapter 4, and this will be the first of two things in chapter 4, is where the author speaks of preparing our speech. He talks about focusing our topic. And this again resonated with me because this is something that I struggle with when it comes to talking in general conversations, or especially when it comes to giving speeches or talks. And that is, I try to cover every detail. I am the kind of person that I want to uncover every stone, cross every T, dot every I, investigate every nook and cranny, if you will. But the reality is, this is just not feasible when it comes to giving a public speech, and even in most conversations, there's just not enough time. And it becomes really exhausting for the person the speaker in preparing the speech, and it also becomes exhausting for the listener as well, when you're just trying to cover every little detail and you chase rabbits. You have a tendency to go off down these rabbit trails. What's better is to limit ourselves, that I've found, and this works for me as the author was suggesting, is to limit ourselves to a few main points and stick to those main points. As tempting as it is to go chasing those rabbits, leave them for later conversations or later talks, or perhaps follow-up question and answer time, or just follow-up conversations. The second thing in chapter 4 that stood out to me is where the author speaks about giving an icebreaker speech. And what stood out to me about this was where he discusses not obsessing over every little mistake and trying to create the perfect speech. My temptation and what I suffer from is what I call the curse of perfectionism. And that is, I want it to be perfect. I want to create the perfect speech. I want to make sure that everything is done absolutely perfect without any mistakes. Again, like in that last point, covering every detail. And the reality is, again, this is just not feasible. We're not going to come up with most likely like the perfect speech. It's just not going to happen. And we're trying to create something that's really uncreatable. And what we need to allow ourselves, and what I found that I need to allow myself to do, is to allow myself the freedom to make some of these mistakes. To just get in there and start and try. You're going to make some mistakes, but the important thing is learning from the mistake. And if we obsess over this perfectionism, then what it does is it leads to frustration, and that frustration leads to failure. Because we're frustrated because we're trying to create this uncreatable thing. And then that leads to this sense of failure when we don't produce this product that we can't produce. And then that failure, that sense of failure, that attitude of failure that we have, stifles growth. And I think this is important when it comes to public speaking, because it's this process that leads to growth. And I was reminded of an ancient proverb, and the proverb is, a righteous man falls 7 times, but he gets back up. And as I was thinking about this concept and this curse of perfectionism and public speaking, this verse came to mind. And the thing that came to mind is, what makes the righteous man righteous? It's not that he doesn't fail, it's that he falls, but he gets back up. And it's that process of falling and making those mistakes, but not staying in the mistake, not remaining in the failure, but learning from it, getting back up and trying again. And I think this is applicable to public speaking in the sense that we got to get out there, allow ourselves to make some mistakes, to learn from those mistakes, to do better, and hopefully develop as a public speaker. Thank you guys for your time. I'm looking forward to watching your videos and seeing what you have to say about the reading this week. God bless you all and have a great week.